Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Sarah Risley. I'm the Certification Officer at GreenCircle Certified, and I'm joined today by Mikhail Davis, who's the Director of Global Marketing Sustainability at Interface. And today what we'd really like to do is dive into how certification, innovation, policy are all accelerating the shift towards a circular economy, especially in the building and manufacturing space. And so we've got Mikhail here to talk a little bit about the great work that Interface is doing in this space. Before we dive in, a couple of housekeeping things. We are open to questions. Any questions you have, we'll cover at the end of the webinar. Please put those in the questions pane so that we can keep track of them throughout the webinar. And then we'll collect and answer at the end as long as we have time. And then if we don't, we'll definitely follow up and reach out to get those answers to you if we don't have time at the end. Lastly, we are recording the session, the webinar, so it's recorded, and then we'll send it out within the next 24 hours for everyone who was registered. So as I mentioned, I'm the certification officer at GreenCircle. I'm very happy to be here. I support our overall scheme in developing requirements and support our clients in helping them verify their sustainability claims. And GreenCircle is really around trust and credibility. And so I'm partnered here today with Mikhail. Mikhail brings a deep expertise from Interface as an actual manufacturer in the space, and they're a global leader in sustainable manufacturing and one of the earliest adopters of circular principles in the flooring industry. And so a little bit about our companies. So GreenCircle Certified is a leading third-party certification body. We're accredited under ANAB, which is for ISO 17065, which is a global framework for certifiers. And we're really recognized for our rigor and our science-based approach to verifying sustainability claims. And so we're partnered here with Interface. So just a little bit about Interface. They're a global flooring manufacturer and a sustainability pioneer. It's been, from their inception, their goal. And so they've long been recognized as that leadership, but really more importantly here today, we really want to share what they're doing, how it's really driving more innovation and support for circular economy. So I did want to just go through and give you guys a quick update on the agenda and what we're going to cover today. So we'll talk a little bit about what circular economy is, why does it matter, why we are looking for leaders in that space, and how it's really going to impact the future of the environment. Product innovation for circularity. So this is really where we will spend some time diving into Interface's approach and how they really have been a leader, but also continue to innovate on this space. And then talk a little bit about the current state of regulatory pressures, how we're verifying those claims, the importance of doing that, and finally, how certification, the work that GreenCircle does, really helps to support and promote those circular systems. And then we'll close out with just a few kind of concepts and call to actions for you guys on how we can have a better future outlook in supporting overall circular economy. And then at the end, like I said, if we have time, we'll definitely get to Q&A. So the circular economy is really about reducing waste, maximizing your resource efficiency, and designing products so that they are circular in nature. It's not just good for the environment, like I mentioned, it really helps us to drive innovation and meeting this rising demand, especially from consumers and regulatory folks and investors on how are you supporting sustainability and what are your goals for doing that? So we'll start with this overview of circular economy and then kind of dive into what Interface is doing. So for us, why does it matter? Why does circular economy matter, especially in the building product space? This is something that is continually addressed, it's continually raised. And so it's really important to kind of understand the principles in terms of why does the circular economy, what impact is it going to have? And so the first is really around reducing our waste and resource use. So this is very straightforward. Anytime where we can keep materials in a circular system, it really minimizes our dependency on virgin materials. And that's really where a lot of that heavy effort comes in from a perspective of, having to create the energy to create those products, use the materials and source them, right? And so by lowering our dependency on virgin resources, it gets to the second reason why this matters, which is the most important for me, which is we're lowering our environmental impact. So we have, really this guide in terms of the circular economy system and how to support overall carbon reduction, because it does cut the embodied carbon of a product, looking at your energy use, and all of those have the strong impacts that we want to really set ourselves up for lowering the environmental impact for future generations. The last two are more manufacturing specific of why it would matter to you as a manufacturer. It's really about driving innovation. So new approaches to design, to material selection, to understanding how to deal with materials at the end of their life, to incorporate them back into the cycle. And so for us, that's really around creating innovation and creating spaces where that's really needed, and also recognized. And so that's really where, you come into the last one, which is meeting market and regulatory demands. And so this is aligning. Circular economy is definitely growing in terms of its expectations on transparency, for sustainability claims, for overall compliance, not just in the US, but across the world. And so really by designing and incorporating that, you have a lot of reasons why circular economy matters, and why we should really care to incorporate that into our operations. So let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about what is circular economy, what you keep saying that, Sarah, what does it mean? So if we take ourselves from the very beginning, the linear model that I have represented here is the very traditional system. So it's based on you take, you make, you throw away. And so raw materials are extracted, they're transformed into a product, and then ultimately they get discarded as waste after they have their use life. And so this model is very, as you can see, it's very resource intensive in that every time you want to make a product, you have to extract more virgin material. And so it relies heavily on those inputs and really offers limited opportunities to create that cycle of reuse and recovery. And so this system, this linear system, contrasts very much with a circular system in that, it's really, the circular system is really meant not to have an end. It's meant to continually reuse and understand how to manage that waste. And so in material intensive industries like building products, construction products, flooring, the shift isn't just theoretical, it's a business imperative, not only for us to meet our sustainability goals, but also to really help support and be innovative in your overall operations. And so as we move from linear to circular system, that's really where the circular system is designed to, again, not have an end. So we're continually cycling through. It's designed to keep materials in use through that cycle by reusing, recycling, regeneration. Like I said, it reduces our overall environmental impact. And so we're, preserving resources. We're supporting long-term sustainability by closing that loop in material flows. And so you'll see based on this graphic how much it differs from a linear model, and in that the goal is really about keeping materials in use as long as possible to really be able to see the impact and some of the effects of not having to continually use virgin material. And so really for us, this is where Interface, Mikhail and his team have really embedded circularity into every layer of their product development, and how they're incorporating it into their supply chain. So as an example that we'll hear a little bit about later in the session, their re-entry program is a great example of this cycle. And it's a closed system that's in action. So it's recovering old carpet and using that to manufacture and reincorporate it into new products that Interface is selling. And so you can see where that does not have an end, where we continue through the cycle of reusing those materials and having less dependency on overall virgin materials. And so one of the critical pieces to understanding a circular economy is really understanding these principles that I keep referring to. So the reduce, reuse, recycle, regenerate. And so I want to just spend a little bit of time on these 4 key principles, because they are the principles that that guide the circular economy model. They help to extend that product life, reduce waste, and then regenerate natural systems. And so the first one is really around minimizing your material use and waste by design. Reuse is designed for durability, repair, second life applications. So again, it goes back to this concept of designing your products for durability. Recycling, so being able to recover materials and then being innovative enough to use those in new products or within the same cycle of that product life, like carpet tiles from Interface. And then the last one is to restore, which is regenerate. So it's restoring ecosystems and prioritizing renewable regenerative resources in product and system design. So this could be, you're looking at how you're designing your product, but and more importantly is really around how are you actually manufacturing that product and understanding the tools that you can use to really help restore those natural systems and integrate things like solar power. And so these four kind of concepts are really the pillars that uphold that whole circular economy model. And so they're principles that support not only sustainability, but resilience and responsible sourcing for materials. And so they will have a wider impact, not only for your sustainability goals, but for your operations as well. So how does this build in, specifically for flooring and building materials, and one thing that I wanted to highlight is it's great to kind of talk about things in concept and to really get behind them in concept, but how do you actually put that into action? And so the flooring and building materials industry is really significant for me because they face sustainability challenges because they're high material intensity industry, right? And so the circular economy principles can be very challenging for them, especially if you're looking at the life cycle of the products that you produce or that you sell. And so really what we have to do though is take these challenges and turn them into opportunities. And so that's where we're really highlighting innovation, really highlighting how you're designing your products and recognizing that from a claim perspective, so you can stay as a leader in the industry. And so, for us, the circular economy principles turn into opportunities because you're really trying to design that in. So take back reuse programs are a great example where depending on the life cycle of your products, you can use that as a post-installation waste, keeping those materials in the cycle for longer by recovering them, incorporating them back into your manufacturing process, or even reusing them, but using them in a different way. And so there's a growing demand for claims around that and transparency because there are a lot of ways you could communicate about this. And so one of the opportunities really comes in from a certification perspective, but also just following the guiding principles in a very direct way. And so allowing companies to adopt those strategies, not only to have defendable claims, as they're really trying to, show their innovation and leadership, but also to give you a competitive edge. So it's about, driving innovation, meeting sustainability expectations of clients, and a lot of times, you might get recognized for those innovations because they're new and no one has ever done them before. And so one company that has not only recognized those challenges, but fully embraced them for the opportunities of circularity is Interface. As a global flooring manufacturer, Interface has embedded circular design into every layer of their business. And they're a leading example of how innovation and sustainability go hand in hand. And so they have spent a lot of time developing their system and have seen a lot of effects and impacts of doing that, achieving significant carbon footprint reductions, looking at their supply chain to align with recycling. They have a great take back program and have this traceability through tools like mass balance, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And so before we get into some more of the turning challenges into opportunities, I'd like to spend a little bit of time and want to introduce you to Mikhail. And so it's really about bringing this concept to life. So he's going to walk us through how Interface is driving product innovation for circularity from design to end of life, and then what does that look like for them in a real world setting and how they're having the impact today. So Mikhail.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone out there listening. Yeah, so it's a fun topic today. This is So people think that Interface sort of started out with this idea that we were going to be a sustainable company. We did not. We had 20 years of just being the world leader in modular, soft surface flooring, carpet squares, in other words. And then in 1994, about 20 years after the company was founded, the founder, Ray Anderson, had this epiphany that, wow, the way he'd made his money was going to leave this huge damaging, legacy on the environment, on future generations. So from 1994 onward, that was when we sort of determined to try to change everything. But we very much were built just like any other manufacturing company. Ray's first book was called Mid-Course Correction, because he realized like we were trying to turn a really big ship that we'd already sent in the wrong direction. We had to figure out how do we get that thing to turn in a fundamentally different course. So that's been kind of the work. And I think from very early on, circularity was part of how we imagined, because you're trying to imagine how do you get from this, Ray's really bad news epiphany was that every product that he'd ever made had generated damage to the environment for resource extraction, damage to the environment from manufacturing, and then all of the products he'd ever made were going to end up in a landfill or an incinerator. So how do we interrupt that? Obviously, circularity, which we didn't use that term back then in the 90s, but now is kind of the term. But how do we close the loop? How do we become cradle to cradle instead of cradle to grave? There's lots of different terms for it. And it's this really compelling concept. And then we started looking to, the early days of biomimicry. How would nature do it? Nature definitely keeps the same, materials in use over and over again. And I think there's some subtlety to understanding exactly how nature does that maybe we can learn from. Nature doesn't, for instance, do some of the things we do with take back programs where you take back a material in California where I am and ship it all the way to Georgia to be recycled. That would be like if a leaf fell off a tree and had to blow 3,000 miles that way in order for it to turn into soil. So we have, there's some differences in how nature does it. We have to figure out how do we do some of this stuff more locally and more efficiently, and not so brand specifically. If only one company in the world can recycle your products, that's not a very resilient system. Might not be a very efficient system. So lots of room for innovation. This has always been part of the idea, but 25 years on, when we did our 25th anniversary report, we acknowledged that circularity did not go the way we expected it to go. We thought we would be taking back more. We thought we would be putting more of our old products into new products. The fact that we're doing it at all is notable. Lots of companies like to talk about circular economy. The number of them that actually can demonstrate exactly what they're doing and how much of it they're doing is very different, which is why we're having this conversation about certification. Because right now the talk is greatly in excess of the actual actions and progress on circularity, which is why I want to focus a lot today on figuring out. I will be happy to share exactly what we're doing and what we're not doing. The first talk I ever saw by Ray Anderson, he acknowledged that his company had helped cause this huge environmental problem, which I had just studied in school. We continue in that vein today and being willing to share both the good news and the bad news about our mid-course correction. Because until we're really willing to grapple with the metrics, we can't solve the problem. If we're pretending we have the problem solved, we won't ever devote resources to actually solving it. Because we're getting credit for pretending. Why invest in actually solving it? Because, man, it's difficult. The economy is not set up to be circular. The circular solution is often not the most economical solution in a current economy, but we need to be willing to make the investments and be willing to be held to account for, okay, you've made it this far, what's next? Because right now there's a lot of people saying, oh yeah, we're totally recyclable or whatever the circularity claim is. And until we actually start to tie that down to some real metrics, no one's actually going to innovate. And so that's kind of we start with modularity, so you can do repair, one of our important re's. You put it in your reuse category. We focus on durability. Those are things that are super easy in terms of that's what we've always promised. Now, once we get into figuring out exactly how do we take that product, once we're done with it, once it's done being durable, and once you've done all the selective replacement and repair, kept it in use as long as possible, we end up with it back. What can we really do with that? And that's a lot of what we work with GreenCircle on, is to certify this is what you're actually doing. And I'm eager to continue to work and figure out, okay, these are the metrics we have today. What additional metrics could we have for tomorrow? And then, of course, it gets into a regulatory conversation, which we can talk about. But I was just in Sacramento in California, which is one of the only states that has implemented a extended producer responsibility program for carpet. So we're talking a lot about whether the incentives they put in place are really driving more take back and better product design, with regard to that state regulation. So interesting conversation. I would say still very much, unfortunately, in the early stages, because we're still don't have great data on what's actually, moving the needle and what isn't. Do you want to show? Yeah, we can. This is not a slide we're using anymore, but this is, very much part of our mission. We looked at, our initial mission was about, can we show that we could have a zero negative impact manufacturing company? That was the mid-course correction. As we started nearing our date goal for that, we're like, wow, that's not even enough. We have to actually solve the problem, not just be less of a contributor to it. So reframing it in terms of how do we drive a business movement toward reversing global warming? So we call that climate take back. And now we've set a goal by 2040 to be a carbon negative enterprise and to show that that's possible. Could you be a for-profit growing company that is actually net taking carbon out of the atmosphere where we have too much of it, putting it, for instance, into all the products we make? So that's another big part of our mission, and circularity is one of the ways that we get there. Like, you can't become carbon negative if you're still getting a lot of your raw materials out of a hole in the ground or an oil well. So obviously, where are you going to get them? We're going to have to grow them. We're going to have to get them from waste, all of these things. And even if we grow them once, we're going to need to keep those grown materials, say from agriculture or from agricultural waste. We can't just use them once. So circularity is a part of even of our renewable materials. You can go to the next one. So we talked a bit about this. Designing with circularity in mind. The main thing we design for, just to be totally honest, is durability. If you were to design our product to come apart neatly into discrete plastics, it would not perform according to marketplace specifications. So this is one where I just try to be brutally honest. There are things that we no longer use in our products that confounded the recycling process. So we use ingredient substitutions. But in terms of the physical design of a carpet tile, for example, it's not designed for recycling. It's designed for reuse because it's really durable and it comes apart in modules. But in terms of recycling, you would never put that many different materials really tightly bound together into a product if you meant it to be separatable easily for recycling. So there's just a sort of reality check on no carpet is really designed. People are playing with trying to make it out of one material, but most carpet is at least 3 different plastics. Which is not how you design it if you wanted to really just harvest one plastic for recycling. But for reuse, no one has ever used a 12-foot roll of carpet, pulled it up and reused it in another space, other than like if you rolled out the red carpet at the Oscars or something and used it once, or put it in, a convention, floor for 3 days of a convention. But people all the time look at a floor made of carpet tiles and say, hey, gosh, most of this was under the desks for 5 years. Let's just reuse it in the next space. So it's designed for reuse. For being honest, not so much for recycling. The design for recycling we've actually done is to design the machines on the back end to be able to tolerate the fact that our product is not designed to come apart easily, to be able to work with a mixed material. And that's the process that GreenCircle certifies for us in the US, which is that many years in development process of being able to take this very mixed 4 plastics bound tightly together material and turn it into a feedstock for a new product. So lots of design on the machine side, probably less on the product side, other than paying attention to which materials don't work well in our machines. So for instance, we removed asphalt, which used to be in the carpet tiles, and a little bit of what we made in the US and a lot of what we made in Europe. That material is really difficult to work with in recycling. It sticks to everything. Once we removed that, it suddenly removed this obstacle to recycling. So I would say that's a design for recycling. Mostly what we're doing is we're designing for modularity, reusability, and durability. You can move to the next one. So the focus that we end up having, and I always like to make sure people understand circularity goes well upstream from product take back, because product take back is just basically the last resort. Now we have places where we have really good options to get products reused. So if we reclaim it through our reentry end of life take back program, it might actually end up continuing to be carpet tile. But both in the US and China and the Netherlands, which is where we actually have carpet tile factories, we have some capacity to actually turn a product we take off the floor into a new product. Sorry, so we're going to take back products and actually recycle it into a new product. If we're pulling, product out in India, we have to look for a local option. We're not going to ship it back to China. They won't accept it for starters legally. Second of all, it'd be very inefficient. But so then we're exploring. I was just in India looking for local partners to do reuse in India. That's the thing you can do without having to have a lot of recycling technology, which we don't have in India, for a carpet tile. It's designed for reuse. If we can get a cleaning system, and we've piloted this, clean it, sanitize it, resell it probably to a lower price point in the market. So you have to have local options. Here in North America, where we work with GreenCircle, is our most mature actual recycling technology. So most of the material that goes into reentry, over 95% is actually going to go to feedstock for new products. But that is the most recycling focused of our reentry program around the world. And so that's where we can start to look for how do we optimize this system, both on our end, but also on the client's end, to make it as economically efficient as possible. Because I always like to remind people there's two discrete words in circular economy. Circular is like a technical challenge. Can this be done? Economy is, would you ever want to do it? We could do it, but it'd be so expensive that we would never do it, is not circular economy. That's just circular. Circular economy is if we can put those two things together and say, we can do it and we want to do it because the economics are decent. And those are related but discrete challenges. So if a customer calls up and say, hey, I've got a bunch of interface flooring, we have to look at, for instance, can we efficiently ship that back to Georgia? Do we have, or maybe which really requires a full truckload. So it means that large jobs are easy, 3,200 square feet of carpet or more. Smaller jobs are like, wow, we can't afford to send FedEx freight by for every 400 square yards you've got. But a lot of places, we now have a local aggregator who can say, okay, send the truck to us. We've got your 10 different 400 square yard jobs right here. It's a full truckload now. So send it to our local partner's warehouse rather than to the job site where they maybe only had 400 yards. And it'd be really expensive to send out a truck for every 400 yards because we're going to have to pay someone to do a partial truckload. So the economics of the logistics become very important to whether the circular economy really is economical and whether it actually happens. So this is part of what I always encourage people. One of the metrics we need to start to keep track of is how often do you actually do this? Or is it really just circular and we're like, oh yeah, we have a take back program. We can do it. But then you have to look into the economics of like, would they ever want to do it? And that's where we try to be real. Like, okay, for less than a truckload, someone else has to pay for it. The economics are not there for us just to promise that to every customer. We hope that they will be someday, but they're not right now. Now, we do it sometimes for special situations, but we can't promise it to everyone. So the what we start to do with GreenCircle is to say they have to go and look at all of our internal documentation and say, okay, we see that you received all this material from these particular places through your reentry system, and then to track that whole, flow of material in terms of how much material actually went on to the next stage of the process. Okay, this was the shredded material that was the carpet tile that then flowed over into the next stage where we compound it as part of the formulation for the backing. And then here's the documentation of it moving into being made into new carpet tile backing. It's actually real, and we can start to assign some percentages and numbers to that, because that's what's often missing. If you can go to the next slide. So these are some of this is just a standard metrics we publish every year. We have a science-based target for 2030, so it's part of why we publish against a 2019 baseline. So we're looking at carbon footprint is a big one for us. We're always looking at how do we reduce the carbon footprint of our entire portfolio, not just of our one hero product that is the super cool green, only people in Seattle and San Francisco buy it because it's too expensive product, but across our whole portfolio, what is the average carbon footprint of all the different kinds of flooring we sell, and has that gone up or has that gone down this year? And this is based on actual sales. So if we were to make, which we make a couple carbon negative products, if we were to sell more of that, this number would go down. Right now, it's a very small percentage of our sales. But what we're working on is having that carpet tile and that LVT and that rubber we sell every day have a lower footprint by doing things like adding recycled content, adding bio-based content, using renewable energy, adds up to this wonderful metric of what is the total carbon footprint of making the product. You can see the single biggest thing though is that second metric. So you've got down, if you look at carpet tile on the right, down 35% since 2019. And then the total of all the inputs, what percentage of those are recycled and bio-based? It's about 62% recycled and 5% bio-based on carpet tile. So you can see most of it is actually from waste streams. But that's the number one reason that the footprint is going down. It's actually gone down 88% since we started measuring in 1996. That's all about transitioning away from these fossil-based inputs. You can see on the bottom, if you include all of the products, so LVT and rubber are less far along in terms of changing away from the fossil-based inputs, it's 52%. This is a number I would love to see every company have to publish. This one shows our gap is 48%. 48% of our materials are still from mined or oil and gas or some other extractive input. And so you can also see, right now it's mostly waste, but we're starting to get bio-based in the picture. Now, this is what we certify in the US with GreenCircle. You can see a lot of people will say, oh, our product's recyclable. Well, what percent? Because once we get into percent, someone has to observe the yield on your process. Someone has to say, okay, when we take back a product for this hypothetical recycling, what actually happens? What percentage of that old product ends up in a new product that we can track that flow of materials? So we have some products right now where you really would have to remove the yarn in order to recycle the backing. Other products where we can grind up the whole product and put the yarn into the next product as it, that's 100%. We can put the whole carpet tile ground up into a new carpet tile. Other ones we have to separate off part of the material before we can do it. So that'd be the 59%. The 100% is if we grind up a whole tile. And so then you can see this other number, we've got, about 2.5 million pounds of material. So how often did you actually run this system starts to be answered by that. That is, we actually had that many pounds of material run through the system. And of course, at the product level, what that ends up with is, this is for one of our product lines, with the Sequest GB backing, we have certified 8% closed loop material. So theoretically recyclable, 100%, but how many of those carpet tiles actually flowed through from all the ones we collected and ended up in the product? 8% of the new product is from those materials. So right now we're working on a process to make an additional product line with at least 2 to 5%, and GreenCircle will be certifying whether it's 2 or whether it's 5. But the idea is to get a product that we sell more of to have what'll probably end up being a lower percentage. But this will, of course, will increase the amount of that material we need. We'll have to collect more than 2.5 million pounds if we're going to make it standard in most of the yards we sell. Right now, it's in a specialty backing. But if we were to put it in our standard backing, which is the plan, we're going to need a lot more material. We're going to need to get a lot more material flowing through that system, even to get to 5% if we're selling, 8 times more of that product than we were of the specialty backing with 8%. Now, the other thing I'll point out, just for full transparency, we also certify our LVT as 100% recyclable. LVT is pretty easy to recycle. It's mostly the same material. It's just a plastic plank. But the fact is that we, right now, haven't ever taken back any LVT to speak of. So you can see the reality is we can certify it. We can show you on a trial basis, which is what we showed our auditor for GreenCircle. We can make this into carbotile backing or even into another product. But are we doing it? The reality is, we can certify that it can be done, but are we doing it? 0 pounds collected. That's the reality check there. So that's a thing for recycling claim. I always think we need to add this next level down. With the carbotile, we've got 3 levels. Can it be done, and at what percentage? How much material is flowing through the system overall, and what percent ends up in the new product? We don't have that yet for LVT, and we might not, because we are recycling, through a right now. And when we get LVT back, it's actually going to another partner, and so we'll have to see if we can certify that system, because otherwise we'll never get to where we are for carbotile. But again, underlying all this is we need metrics, we need transparency. Otherwise, we're going to veer into greenwash, because everyone wants to be for the circular economy. If you look online, it's reached the status of a mega trend in terms of how much buzz it has. But if you look at the underlying economic numbers of are we becoming more circular, we're actually becoming less circular. So that gap between it's a mega trend everyone wants to talk about and the actual numbers shows that there's a lot of greenwash in this area. So that's a good kind of overview of what we're doing now. Why don't you take us away to the next topic, Sarah?
Thank you, Mikhail. So it actually leads in very well to the rest of the content that we wanted to share, you guys, because really focusing on not only the challenges, as Mikhail said, but ensuring that they align with where we actually want to go and what our actual impacts and the goals that we have in order to do that. And you have to be innovative. And so there are a number of ways that you are driven to do that. Certainly the market, as Mikhail said, the market requirements and people's awareness around circular economy and the positive impacts that it could have over a long period of time. And so that's being noticed for sure. And so we're starting to see a lot of regulatory and not even requirements, but even just favorable procurement policies, things that are really, as the momentum around circular economy grows, the regulators and policy agencies are really looking at how do we use that to shape requirements to really help incentivize, to help enforce and hold people accountable and ensure that transparency. And so you want to go to the next slide. For us, what do you need to know about how regulations and policy frameworks are really starting to highlight, but also, we need them in order to ensure that accountability, to ensure there's no greenwashing. And so what do you need to know about how to navigate those regulations? And to Mikhail's point, there's a lot of opportunity for input. There's a lot of opportunity for us to use that voice. And so, really what we're seeing is this patchwork of state requirements. From a federal level, there are definitely procurement and a lot of influence around incorporating, so things like LEED and green building and EPA's procurement and improvement of certified claims for actually being able to sell to the government. But really for us, the challenge here is that the states are also enacting their own regulations, and it's state by state. And so you create this patchwork that you have to comply with depending on where you're distributing and where you're manufacturing. And so that really leads to a lot of complexities and things that you want to stay ahead of, things that you want to understand how they're being represented and how you're going to be held accountable, and how you can really use designing a circular economy system, for example, to really help support you in the future. And so the other thing I wanted you guys to know is really that in the past, they haven't always been very product category specific. And so what we're seeing right now is a lot of those regulations, a lot of even the pending legislations that are draft going in, they're really looking at explaining requirements at a product category level. And so we see that in some of these, and so this is by no means a comprehensive list of all the regulations, but I wanted to highlight a few. Especially in California, it represents obviously the most advanced requirements around recycled content and some of those pillars that really help support an overall circular economy. And so we see those in, like CalGreen and CalRecycle with their building code requirements and how they're signaling out and really trying to kind of split out product categories based on their impact. Starting to see those minimum recycled content, especially even in carpet, as goals as part of California's ABA 6.3. And then looking across at other states, really New York and Maryland both have procurement specs requiring, especially in flooring, requiring around, what the recycled content needs to be or could be, how you're incorporating take back. Same thing with Washington and Oregon, really looking at expanding their recycled content laws. And regulations that they already even have in place to really target building materials and looking at those like product category by product category. So for a lot of those, and I know I didn't give you guys a comprehensive list, but a lot of what we're seeing is that, like recycled content, especially in circular design, is being prioritized. But again, we're looking at these like product categories. So things like flooring and carpet, insulation has been a focus from a green building credit perspective, favoring insulation that's made from recycled materials like glass and cellulose, understanding how that may impact. And then the big one is EPR. So the extended producer responsibility is really framework is really starting to take in being implemented in regulations. And so understanding what that means for accountability, for metric tracking, for everything that you will need to do in order to comply with having a lot around, especially around packaging, that's used in building materials. And so, for us, that really, it's a highlight that I wanted to just quickly cover in terms of the regulations are coming. And people are really starting to, as Mikhail said, they're really starting to understand circular economy in terms of it as a trend, in terms of its impact that it could have. And so we're going to start to see more of those, factors, more of those principles, right? Those key factors of circular economy built into things like LEED and USGBC and built into procurement guides to really help drive and incentivize those sustainable products. And so, for us, it's really then about, okay, if people are becoming aware, and folks like Interface have been doing it from a long time ago, right, in terms of the beginning of circular economy, then how do we measure that? How do we make sure that we're making consistent claims, that you can not only be prepared for regulations like this or procurements, but that you understand what that means in order to really define it and to properly, with some rigor and integrity, track that. And so one of the concepts that I wanted to just talk a little bit about was how GreenCircle does it. And so before I dive into our requirements and that type of thing, I wanted to talk about mass balance as a methodology. And so really, in this space of regulatory or procurement expectations, especially around recycled content, we need a way to be accurate, to Mikhail's point, to really understand what we're trying to track, how we can scale it. Is it economically feasible for a company or for your operations? And so one of the most important tools enabling this is, especially with the complexity of manufacturing systems today, is really trying to understand mass balance and how to use that methodology to ensure that it not only is working, but that we're accurately tracking and providing claims that we can defend. And so it really gets to that compliance and credibility. And so closed loop recycling is really what we're talking about here when we're talking through mass balance in terms of keeping track of material flows. And it's one of the most effective strategies for circular economy because it's readily accessible. Right? So if you can get your customers to return your products and can use it in the same system, it becomes a really efficient and effective, but you do have to do it in a way where you can actually measure it and understand how to track that from a chain of custody perspective through your manufacturing process. And so what sets closed loop systems apart from just recycled or recovered material is that it reintroduces it into the same types of product streams. So we saw that with the, all the work that Interface is doing in terms of, their take back program. And so it's not downcycled, it's not taken out of that full circle, right? And so that's really a critical distinction for maintaining that material value and transparency. You'll go to the next slide. So what is mass balance? So mass balance is a methodology that a lot of verifiers such as GreenCircle will use. And it's a way for us to measure and accurately track materials as they're, the inputs as they're going through production. And so it allows us to not only track the inputs, but then to properly allocate them across what you're putting out in that same system, that same process. And this really matters because we want to make sure that there's no false claims, that they're accurate, and that we have a consistent methodology manufacturer to manufacturer so that we can make comparison claims with a lot of transparency, and more importantly, that you can meet those regulatory and procurement guidelines and frameworks that are starting to pop up everywhere, even at the state level. And so it really, from a mass balance perspective, it does support the industry-wide adoption of recycled content and helps, but the critical piece for using any of these methodologies, but specifically mass balance, is that it does require a lot of rigor. And so we need strict auditing, you need to track, you need to document so that you can properly verify consistently year over year to ensure that accuracy and prevent any misclaims or even overclaiming where you think you're doing better than you actually are because you're not tracking with enough detail. And so on the right hand side, I'll show you just really quick, those are the data inputs that are required. So we're not just looking, we're looking at total production. We're not just looking at, okay, what's on the floor, what do they have as an input, but really trying to understand the entire process so that we can properly account for that when we're looking for and making those claims. Some of those common challenges, though, that come with that mass balance methodology are the things that I want to highlight. And similar to Mikhail, not everything's perfect. And so he was talking about, like they made a midstream change and kind of having these realizations. So does the methodology and the ways that, GreenCircle as experts in verification are trying to align from an innovative perspective as well. And so some of these, and I won't go through it in a ton of detail just for the sake of time, you guys, but there are a lot of challenges around data accuracy and availability, how transparent you are with your suppliers so we can see the entire chain of custody for that product. What you're doing with that product once you receive it. So, tracking the inventory changes that may happen month over month or aligning production numbers. And then how do you segregate if you don't, how are you tracking from a commingled perspective, and really trying to understand the complexities within the chain of custody. And so for me, I wanted to use this as a complementary example to, we have a good methodology, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't lack rigor and that it doesn't lack requirements for us to make continued innovations, continuing to review and understand and be a part of that market transformation that will happen when you incorporate a closed system. And so there's a lot of importance around having accurate recycled content claims for regulatory compliance, but more so in terms of really being able to be trusted from a market brand perspective, and really being able to see yourselves as not only are we checking the box, but that you're really demonstrating leadership and bringing that change, that transformation to the market. So what does that really look like for us? That is really where certification is, and claim verification is critical strategy. So we've seen that, the mass balance offers a scalable way to track recycled content, but it's very complex, and it's only one methodology that is, not without its challenges. And so tracking alone isn't enough. So to really build trust and ensure accountability, the claims we have must be independently verified. And so that's what GreenCircle does. It's where we play a critical role in, how we're supporting transparency, credibility, and then market access into circular systems. So really quickly, GreenCircle, this quick overview, we are an independent third-party certification body. We specialize in sustainability claims. And so our certifications cover a range of those attributes. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see there are a number of certifications that GreenCircle supports at an attribute level. So when I say attribute, we're looking at one piece that will really help support your claims overall for circular economy. For example, recycled content. And Mikhail already mentioned we have our closed loop product certification, where we're able to actually give you a percentage that you can put on your marketing, you can put in your product labels, to really kind of highlight and showcase your leadership and innovation in that space. And so by working with GreenCircle, companies really reduce that overall risk of greenwashing, but more importantly, you're meeting and staying ahead and giving yourself a competitive advantage. So not only staying ahead of those regulations, but staying ahead of where your consumers, where your investors, where your stakeholders really want to see verified sustainability labels. And so I want to, thank you. Go to the next slide. So again, some quick examples where we are at, from a recycled content certification, closed loop certification. Interface Mikhail gave a great example of how they've used that and implemented the closed loop certification. And again, really looking at it from this perspective, not only of checking the box, but from a continuous improvement. How do you create a baseline, and how do you continuously improve and get that number to be where they want it to be? And so these certifications really do help to ensure credibility across all of your stakeholders, not just, and a lot of times you think about consumers, but also going back to your investors, going back to your board, folks that are going to hold you accountable for those ESG goals. And so a lot of companies that work with GreenCircle will incorporate those certifications and the data that we provide to them as part of that, in their sustainability annual reporting, in their ESG goals. It helps them then define better continuous improvement opportunities to really meet those goals if they have a long-term plan as well. And so it really helps to be that market differentiator. So products stand out in a procurement process, if you're submitting RFPs, if you're doing green building with LEED or WELL, and especially in those cases where sustainability is weighted very heavily in decision making. And so really for us, it's about using the certification as a strategic tool in a very similar way that Interface has done, not just for compliance, but to really help show that you're ahead of the game, that you have a competitive advantage, and that you're really a leader in trying to think in that space. So one thing I wanted to show just really quickly that's important for us is we don't just stop at certifying those specific strategies and tools that you use for circular economy, like closed loop products and recycled content, and waste diversion. We also really highlight with our certified sustainability facts label. So the CSF label is really, as you can see here, meant to tell a comprehensive story. It's meant to show all of the ways that a product is really achieving or has a sustainability attribute that can be associated with it. And so you can see, even for us, our label, circular economy, is top of the label, and we have a number of different ways that we allow people to, use not only their GreenCircle certifications like recycled content, but even bio-based content. As an example, it's not a certified attribute from GreenCircle, but if you have verified testing and documentation, you can include it on this label. And so again, it's just kind of highlighting not only our commitment to accurate and science-backed claims and verifications and really understanding the challenges with some of those methodologies, but it's also about incorporating that into your overall sustainability strategy for a product and being able to communicate that clearly. So, for us, the benefits, we've been talking the whole time, and this is really just a great slide to summarize all of them. We're looking at continuous improvement. So that first one's so important, providing a baseline for measuring and tracking in a consistent kind of science-backed way, but it also then really helps you then decide, where do you want to target? How do you know what you want to improve? What do you want to spend capital on? How do you mitigate that risk then? And using and having defendable claims, so risk mitigation and protecting from greenwashing, really looking for and staying connected with GreenCircle is helpful, because we're really going to allow you to leverage our expertise and staying ahead of regulations and staying ahead of where, in the same way you guys are looking at those, we are as well. And so we're constantly updating, constantly evaluating parts of, lots of committees, lots of comments, and to ensure that our certifications are relevant, but also, really held true to what the market needs and how we want as our mission to have global product change for sustainable products. So we've seen, third-party certification does provide a really strong strategic foundation for verifying circularity claims, building that trust, getting the data you need to continually improve your process. But it is just one part of the bigger picture. To Mikhail's point of, kind of going through their process, they saw it as a very strategic tool. And so not just a check the box and get it, but how do you leverage that value beyond just having a defendable claim? And so as we look ahead, it's clear that the landscape will continue to evolve. It has been evolving for a lot of years, and really starting to see that being driven by regulatory momentum, prioritizing innovation for material systems, especially trying to understand bio-based, trying to understand how to depend less on fuel-based materials, and then really having a lot of our consumers and stakeholders demanding and expecting sustainable products. So what is on the horizon and how you should look at that, it's just a few kind of key topics here is really anticipate the regulations, prepare for expanding recycled content and traceability mandates, look at your system, design for circularity, and Interface has given us just a great example of how they've done that in terms of their material selection, in terms of their take-back programs, and then the third part, which is they verified those with GreenCircle. So invest in that transparency. Use third-party certifications like GreenCircle. It helps to reduce your risk. It helps to make sure that what you want to claim is actually what you would achieve if you looked at it with a standard methodology. And then really, the last one is probably the most important for me, which is look at your supply chain, look at your overall value chain, look at everything about how you can collaborate with your partners, your scalability. Those are critical ways to really help you not only support it internally, but really have the impact that you're looking for in meeting your ESG goals. So I do realize we have 1 minute left, so I don't think we have super big time for questions, but what I will do, you guys, is make sure that we get all the questions answered and back out to you. I would love for you to reach out if you had a question and didn't get a chance to ask it, or wanted to learn more from Mikhail or I. So this is our contact information here. So again, I'm a certification officer with GreenCircle, and I want to just thank Mikhail for giving us such a great deep dive into the work that they're doing, and even highlighting the challenges, highlighting the things they're working on, as just such a great representative of leadership in that space, and how, you know, GreenCircle has really been partnering with them on that. So thank you so much, Mikhail, for joining us and doing that deep dive. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your day. And Mikhail, any closing comments that you had before we wrap up?
Yeah, great to work with GreenCircle on these issues, and I think I love that we got to talk about mass balance. But just in the final thought, I will say on mass balance, which gets pretty deep in the weeds, but if you Google it, you will see that there's a lot of pushback against the idea. And it's one of those ones where I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, because it has a useful function in change management. You can't necessarily get all of the good ingredients you want, but could you get 20%? And let's give you credit for that. The thing I will advise you, if you ever see a mass balanced 100% claim for bio-based or recyclable, you should distrust it. If it's 100%, why do you need to mass balance? So it's 100%, it shouldn't be mass balance. So just your little rule of thumb takeaway for the last minute of the webinar.
And it's one of those things where, you know, really using that as an example of how we have to continue to innovate on our side in terms of claim verification and understanding the complexities, right? And so it's a very similar process for certifiers as well, not just staying ahead of the regulations, but making sure that our claims and the way we're validating them really help support. So again, thank you all for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, big thanks to Mikhail. And, you know, definitely reach out if you have questions or want more information. Thanks, everyone.